So you may very well be the epitome of living the American dream. Even through your tragedy, you turned so much triumph into it all. And even from a very difficult start in your own childhood. Can you tell us a little bit about your childhood and some of just a little bit about yourself and when you were younger?
Wherever I lived as a child growing up, we were the poorest family among poor neighbors, whether it was an inner city or a rural area. Um, we, our family struggled, and we moved a great deal. With my dad was an itinerant carpenter, and he was searching for work. Um, it was it was a difficult time with the parents also divorced and remarried, and I had three younger brothers. So that childhood was difficult, especially when some school years I changed schools 5 times.
Hmm.
Um, the, there are many people who have as rugged a time as I had then, but big turning point for me was when I was a senior in high school at the age of 16, and a nice young man came to our church to a little hayride for the teenagers. And he was in the Air Force. He was an Air Force mechanic and 18 years old. And he walked up to me with a bunch of other girls around. And he walked up to me, put out his hand, and said, "Hi, my name is Dick Scobee." And my life changed forever because within a year we married, and my younger brothers came to live with us. So for the first time in my life, um, our lives were stable.
Would you say he was? I mean, did you find your strength from other places then, or when he came in, that was pivotal?
Oh, well, we needed each other. He was a lonely military guy, and I needed the strength of um, of something that gave me stability in my life. But when I was about 8 years old, um, we lived in the inner city in San Antonio, Texas, and someone was kind enough to give our family a basket of fruit and a little book. And we rarely had fresh fruit in our home. So as I was peeling a tangerine, I looked over and saw the name of the author on the book was Peel, just like the peelings. And I picked it up and started thumbing through it. It was something I could read and understand. It was the power of positive thinking. So I studied it enough that I made it my own story, and I created the ABCs from it to help with survival or to have positive thinking. So the A stood for your attitude. You know, I needed to have a more positive attitude, and B for belief in yourself, but also power greater than yourself. And C was courage to make a commitment. So those that ABC little formula carried me throughout my youth and into my marriage and beyond.
Tell me about your life together with Minister.
uh, Dick Scobie and I were teenagers when we married, um, and he wanted to be a pilot. I wanted to be a teacher. So neither of us knew much about college, but we did know that in order to have those careers that we needed to go to college. So not really having enough money or scholarships or any kind, um, we signed up for night school at San Antonio Community College in San Antonio, and there we each took a college class, and we said, "Oh, we can do this, and we can do this," and from there, scholarships and opportunities, and he eventually was able to graduate from the University of Arizona, and I went on to all kinds of educational opportunities, graduating with a PhD in from Texas A&M. Um, that that was a, a time of we needed the courage to make the commitment and move along. Plus, we had two young children that we were raising. But once he received his college education, he received a commission into the Air Force and became an officer. But his dream was to be a pilot, and sure enough, he applied and was accepted to be a pilot.
How was he picked to be in the space shuttle program?
We were living at Edwards Air Force Base in California, and Dick Scobee was um, a test pilot there, and came home one day with the Los Angeles Times newspaper and said, they've got an ad in here for space shuttle pilots. And I said, oh, remember, you can't be one. You're 6'2" tall, and they don't allow anyone that tall to be an astronaut. And he said, the shuttle is different. It's different from, the Apollo days when when it was a smaller capsule. So he said, but, June, I don't know. I don't know if I should apply. I don't know if I can make it. These are smart guys who are trying for this. Really experienced test pilots flying. Well, he always worked that around with me with, I don't know if I could do it. And then I would encourage. And he applied and was accepted. And it was an exciting day when he was called after all the physical and the questions and applications and testing. He was accepted. Well, we jumped up like little kids. We were so excited.
What were his thoughts about a reusable orbiter, going to and from space? Did he ever express any thoughts about that?
About the shuttle being reusable?
Yes, sir.
Well, it was terrific at the time. It looked like it was the next generation of space flight. Would launch like a rocket, and the shuttle would orbit in space, and then it would glide like an airplane back to Earth. Certainly, that was an exciting time to be a part of that. Not only because it was an opportunity for him to extend his interest in flying as a test pilot, but because he had flown the X-24, which was the prototype for the shuttle design. And as a test pilot, having flown that, the next step was to fly the shuttle.
Did he share any details with you about the kind of training he went through working in mock shuttles, like, weightlessness? Would he come home and talk about these experiences that he had? Any details about training?
Dick Scobee and I both shared our days happenings with each other. He wanted to know about what trouble I got in teaching students again, and I was curious about his day. And we talked. Dinner time was all about talk and sharing our stories with each other. The year of training after he was selected as an astronaut was interesting, as he talked about what they did. His first flight was flying 41C as the pilot, and that was a mission to rendezvous with Solar Max to repair a satellite in space. And it was the first time they had done anything like that with a manned maneuvering units to go out to repair a satellite. It was a terrific mission. He came back home and said, everyone is trying to meet me at the front door to tell them about what it was like to fly in space, reporters, neighbors. And he said, could I take you first, take you away, take you somewhere, and let me tell you first what it was like to fly in space. After all, you believed in me and you encouraged me, and I became an astronaut. So we slipped out the door and went to our favorite restaurant, and that night, the stars in the sky were like the stars in his eyes, twinkling as he told me what it was like to fly in space. And he maneuvered all about, told me with his hands what it was like to rendezvous, what they did, how successful it was. He was so excited about that flight. While he was talking to me, he kept stuffing his napkin under his plate for fear it would float away or something. And then he took a big camera out to take our picture because it was early selfies back in the 80s, and took the picture. But because he'd been managing all that IMAX equipment in space, he just set that camera aside and it came crashing to the floor. So all the wait staff ran over, what's wrong? I said, well, he's just spacey. He was in space only a few hours before that. But to tell you more about what he was like, when I then, after his excitement, I said, but didn't it make you mad that when President Reagan talked to the crew um, on national television, he mentioned every astronaut's name but forgot your name? I said, didn't that make you mad? And he said, no, June, what was important was the mission. The mission was what was so important. Yes, that's the kind of guy he was. Team mission, working together, solving problems. He was a great leader. Had a great deal of respect from fellow astronauts because of his seriousness and his leadership.
Did he discuss the massive media attention given to the Space Shuttle Challenger launch? I mean, this, after all, was the first launch with a teacher going into space. Did he discuss that at all?
Kristen McAuliffe became a great friend of mine. She was a crew member. She worked with the commander, Dick Scobee, but she was my friend. We gathered frequently in my home. She had meals with us. We talked. She taught. I was teaching college. She would talk to my college students. There was a tremendous amount of attention. My goodness, she was representing every civilian in the world on this wonderful opportunity to fly in space. And she was so precious, clever. She became everyone's friend next door. She was so personable and clever with her interviews. And yes, even if it hadn't been a lot of attention because she was the first to fly, I think a lot of people wanted to interview her anyway. She was very approachable and very charming and serious as well about her assignment and who she was representing. Yes, there was a lot of attention. Dick Scobee was the humble, modest guy. And when, whoever it was, Life magazine said, we want a picture of you and the teacher, he'd say, nope, it's my whole crew or just the teacher. He was a team member, and as the commander, he wanted his entire crew to be represented and to be recognized. So he was fair to everyone, but he knew that it was important. And he was so excited that, or I helped him to be excited about being the commander because he came home a few months after his first flight in space, and he said, they're looking for a teacher to fly in space, and they've narrowed it down to 10, and they've asked me to be the commander of that flight. What do you think? And I said, my gosh, here I am, a teacher. We've been working aerospace teaching together all these years. It's perfect. And he said, yeah, they think I'll be good to that teacher since I'm married to one. It was terrific. Yes, we loved every moment of that training period and opportunities to get to know each other.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like a very, very special time. Did he ever talk about any, concerns that he had with the shuttle? After all, it was a pretty complicated vehicle at the time. Did he express any concerns, or was?
Did Dick Scobee express concerns about the shuttle? He was interested in the future of the shuttle and looking at opportunities for improvement and so forth. He complained some about the simulation experiences, that they were pretty rough, and those would be days he'd come home and say, those guys just kept throwing monkey wrenches into my plans and what have you. So concerns along with that training, but they have such good training. There's so many redundant systems. There was never the fear as there was when he was a test pilot flying planes for the first time, taking them up. Yes.
Tell us, if you feel comfortable talking about this, about the last conversation that you remember having with him. What did he say? What did you say?
The last conversation uh, in person with him was in his quarters, in his room, and it was a romantic time, and that's private, and I'll keep it that way. Thank you. But the next morning, when he called to say we're going to fly, and I said, oh, really? Last night you said you wouldn't be flying because of the weather and so forth, and he said, well, they've decided we will. And I said, well, I told all our guests to go on home that you wouldn't be flying. Um, he said, yes, and I love you. And whenever we said goodbye to each other, it was always, I see you in a week, see you in a day, next week, next month. But this time it was, okay, babe, I'll see you in a week. And I love you. And goodbye. We kissed into the phone to each other.
Just nothing different than the romantic times or the other conversations when you say goodbye. It was pretty much a loving goodbye.
It was, yeah. There were comments about our children. Where were they? Were they there? Were they going to be there? It was as sweet and sensitive as always. He was a kind and generous man.
Yeah. Can you tell us where you were during that launch and that day, the 28th, and at what point did you know that something had gone terribly wrong?
Well, Derek, all of the Challenger 7 families were together at Kennedy Space Center. We were on the top of a building, administration building, observing. It was before they built the viewing site that they have now. And we were gathered together. We'd been watching children play and crawl around, and some of the teenagers looking out the windows. And it was the countdown was tense, as it should be. And I was standing next to Steve McAuliffe, explaining to him, because he had the least amount of information about launch and what happens with a launch, and whereas I'd been teaching aerospace in college, and my son and daughter, and we watched it and cheered. It was like we were all on top of the world after it launched. It was a beautiful, beautiful, cold winter morning. The ground shook, the fire crackled, it was tremendous. And we were just all shouting, the top of the world. Can you imagine? Greatest joy for that, our loved ones aboard the crew. And then I saw those solid rocket boosters start veering off in their own direction, kind of spiraling out of a trajectory that was so uncommon. I was concerned about that, and that's when one of the fellow astronauts said we should all go downstairs. And I fell down the stairs. My son took my arm and helped me, and our daughter. It was awkward because I knew something had gone wrong, but my goodness, they trained so much for return to launch landings and all these different places around the world where they could land, and if there was a problem. So I imagined that that's probably what they were doing, although I knew they were well trained. I knew that that's a tough job to do something that's following through with an emergency. When they transported us from this administrative building over to the crew quarters where we had visited so many times, I saw on the street where people were weeping. They were at their steering wheels weeping, or out with their head on the fender, or on the people embracing on the street. Just cars stopped on the street. And I knew it was really, really serious. Um, all of the families in the bus, we were quiet. It was raw emotion that is, um, it's, you're numb. You know, you're so concerned you don't know what. And we stepped into the cruise quarters at the elevator to go up when I heard the NASA radio or TV going, and I heard the announcement, all are lost. No one could have survived. Even before the NASA administrators told us what had happened, I heard that. And we just all quietly went up to the crew quarters until they came to talk to us.
I imagine it didn't really, because it seemed surreal, like it almost wasn't happening. It was.
You're so, and you've gone from this most exciting moment in your life to this terror and with sheer raw, numbness. It's shock. It is totally shock. And it's not just your loved one, but you're thinking about the nation. I was thinking about all this preparation for school teachers who are watching, students who are watching, and to have lost this marvelous crew of people on what was to be one of the most exciting flights ever. Tremendous loss for all of us. NASA was good to us. They took care of us, nurses and doctors, to help us out. And there was some soft weeping. But and a little after a bit, Vice President Bush and Senators Glenn and Garn came to meet with the families, and we were all gathered around as these people stepped in. And I was looking for a leader. I was expecting them to say something, or the commander, Dick Scobee, wasn't there to say something. And so I felt compelled to speak up. So I thanked them for coming. I said, you're these important leaders coming to speak to the families. And then I looked around at each person, and they nodded to me. And I said, but our loved ones were willing to risk their lives for space flight. Please don't let the space missions end with this.
And last question about that day. Well, we'll go here. Oh, still, even today, and even when the 30th anniversary, on the day 30 years passes by, I imagine it's still, rather very emotional for you.
Derek, it is something that you can never get over. A tremendous loss to us all. It was especially difficult then because it was so public. And as individuals, we are accustomed to grieving, to loss, with a beloved grandmother or a favorite pet. But when it's something that reaches out to a whole nation and around the world, we were sharing our grief with an awful lot of people, with people around the world. Even today, people remember, if they're old enough, they remember where they were and what they were doing. My daughter said it best. After the loss of Columbia, she wrote a letter and had all the Challenger children sign it. And the letter was to the children who lost parents on Columbia. And she said, the day my dad died, everybody was watching TV. They were all looking to see the heroes, the space pioneers launch and fly in space. When they died, they all felt like it happened to them. And she said, and it did. They all wanted to say goodbye to the space heroes. And she said, I just wanted to say goodbye to my daddy. So it was a personal time that we shared with the nation. And in a sense, that love helped us. But in another sense, we didn't have that time for our private grief. And that's one of the reasons why within just months, I talked with the families and we said, we have to continue the mission. Remember what Dick Scobee said? June, what was important was the mission. We got the job done. So I said, can we continue their education mission? We can't launch satellites. We can't repair them. But we can continue that education mission. And they said, okay, June, you're the educator. You go do that. We'll make you chairman. And they all joined me to a person to continue that mission. And oh my goodness, what an opportunity for our nation and around the world now. 4.4 million kids have continued that mission on their own, their very own mission.
And Norman Thacker from Jacksonville, who's a good friend, shared an office with your husband. How helpful was it to have a fellow astronaut there, at that time to console and to understand and to...
When NASA flew the families from Kennedy Space Center back to our homes in Houston, each of us were going to be welcomed by an astronaut who was selected to be our assistant, our aides, to help us get through the bad times. Luckily, it was Norm Thagard and his wife, Kirby. When we stepped off the plane, they embraced us, all of us. And from there, they helped us put one foot in front of the other and guide us, direct us, and get through the first few weeks after that accident.
President Reagan's speech the night of the tragedy at the memorial, he tried to bring some comfort to
Yes.
about the Challenger 7, and the families. You kind of touched upon this, but did you feel the love of the nation? Did you feel their arms were bracing around you?
The nation, people everywhere, were generous and loving. I received cards in the mail addressed to Commander's wife. That's all it said. And somehow it got through to Houston and to our home. We had rooms full of mail that we received of condolence and encouragement, and the children's letters especially, and their pictures. And one little boy said, "Don't hide yourself in the closet. You come out and tell us how to continue that mission." Little girl sent her tooth fairy money and said, "This is to help you build the Challenger Center." The letters were so helpful to know that there was all these people were behind us and that they cared. And so many people wanted to do something and make a difference.
That's awesome. The Rogers Commission. Were you angry at all when you hear that the engineers who designed the solid rocket boosters had said that that they may not work in those conditions, and yet they still launched that day? We spoke with Mr. McDonald, who was one of them. Did that?
Challenger was a terrible accident that could have been prevented. And my son sat with me during the Rogers Commission report. He's a pilot himself. And we were both angry. We were both angry to know that it could have been prevented. And yet, human failure, we understand. And they've long been forgiven for those frailties. But yes, that day, it was a sad day when we learned it could have been prevented.
When did you start living again? It sounds as if the mission always stuck with you, but there had to be a healing process and a process to get to the point where did you just start the mission right away? Or when did you start
I escaped some of my serious grieving by focusing on what I could do. I saw we couldn't go anywhere without seeing magazine covers, newspaper stories, TV showing the loss. And I thought somehow I've got to turn this around to something beneficial to our country. And that's when I went to my little ABCs. If I have the right attitude and I share it, if I believe not just in myself and that I can do this, but I believe in a power greater than myself to help me. And that was important. And I had the courage to step out and make the commitment in front of an audience of people. Then that helped me. And by April of that year, we had formed our nonprofit organization. And I was focused, totally focused on what the Challenger Center would be. But there was one personal day when I stepped out in the spring and there was some daffodils that had blossomed. And I looked at those yellow daffodils and I just felt the warmth. No longer did I feel this frozen state that I was living in, but I felt the warmth of the sun and this yellow daffodil, and I felt closer to nature and God, and began to hear music again. It was a wonderful period of new therapy that I was going through, and it's a good recovery.
But how long would you say after that accident did that occur? A couple of years?
Not until March. Yeah. March. April. When do daffodils bloom?
So the Challenger Center. The Challenger Center. How did this, really originate? And what were your goals then? And now, 30 years later, when you look back.
Oh my goodness!
Just talking about your goals now, and it must be so
yeah.
rewarding.
It was not easy because, to begin with, to have the concept of how do you continue a mission, what is it, and to bring together leaders, people. In Houston to help us, and to bring together astronauts and mission specialists to talk to them about it. And finally, we came up with what this concept was about. We had a competition among 3 museums to see which one would win the contract, to be the first one to build it. And we were excited to see that with the competition that the Houston Museum of Natural Science came out winner, and that was our hometown, and important to us too. So our staff from Washington, D.C., our museum developer from New York City, all these were people volunteering, and Vice President Bush gave us the phone number of someone who could donate money for that first Challenger Learning Center. So we did that. And we were going to be content to have one Challenger Center, a learning center. But I visited with Vice President Bush, who said, no, you need these all over the country. You need them all over the country. And I'm a teacher. How could I do that? And he said, come to Washington. I want to talk to you. So flew up to Washington, D.C., He said you need to have CEOs of corporations, you need to have senators on your board, you need to have university presidents, you need these people on your board of directors. And I said, I'm a teacher. I just work with a classroom of students. He said, how do you teach a lesson? I said, well, I inspire them to learn this lesson. I motivate them. By golly, they better learn this lesson. And then eventually I test them to see if they learned it. He said, that's what you do with the board of directors. He said, I want you to grow these learning centers and have them all over the country. And he was a great confidant. My other great supporter was Steve McAuliffe. We talked to each other nearly every other day. Talked about our children, talked about this project, talked about his work, talked about what Krista would want. And it was exciting to see it unfold, the idea unfold, and then to see the museum to follow through with their idea. And besides those leaders, I had one of my former students who was a gaming expert and with computer games. And he helped us with this idea of the scenario. There's a mission to the moon, a mission to Mars, a mission to save planet Earth. So he helped us with the whole storyline of what a Challenger Learning Center would involve, and we built it.
Is there a mission statement?
Yes, it's evolving.
Every,
but
every,
but what's really important, probably what Lisa would like for me to say, is that we really want to inspire today's student to be interested in the STEM careers, STEM, science, technology, engineering, math careers, so that we can help tomorrow's workforce to have these folks working in your field, technology, working as scientists and engineers. And there's a tremendous shortage of these folks. So we're hoping that that's a part. Besides, they're having fun on this mission that they fly, that they'll also be contributing to the future.
yeah, just three more questions and then we're all done.
Okay.
Okay. First one is, have you been to the Kirby Smith Center in Jacksonville?
I have been to the Kirby Smith Middle School Challenger Center. It's marvelous. That was created maybe 15 years ago. It was some time ago. Um, they were so excited to have this center in their school. And of course, Florida, as is Texas and California, are very much identify with the space program. So it was a tremendous opportunity for them to call us to say they had an interest to build a Challenger Learning Center there and to see it installed and see kids show up.
And NASA recently opened a Forever Remembered exhibit. Your thoughts about that exhibit and the importance?
Yeah, uh, Kennedy Space Center uh, was a part of our heart. That's where Dick Scobee worked and all of his crew worked so much. It's where families came to visit, to watch launches. It was so important. And after the accident, the Astronaut Memorial Foundation wanted to create opportunities to honor the crew. And eventually, just this past year, they came up with an optimum kind of honor by presenting a hall of remembrance of each of the crew members and a story about each of them with remembrances that the family members have brought together. And then artifacts from both Shuttle and Columbia are there. And that's a somber reflection. I see the artifact of Challenger has a beautiful flag painted on the side. So it's that part of the fuselage, the orbiter, that that survived, and I call that the heart of Challenger. And then Columbia has the front, windshield, and we like to call that the soul of Columbia. So it's a very touching place. But then you move on, and it's extremely uplifting because it's the recovery. It's all about continuing with space flight. NASA picked up, solved their problems, and moved on. And it's a collection of all the letters from children. And then another section about the crew who followed, the first crew to follow Challenger. So it's an admirable place to visit, and anyone, and it's especially nice because it's under the wings of Atlantis. I mean, that is an awesome image of walking in to see Atlantis, and the display of it, and the creation of it, and then to know it was the last shuttle to fly in, to land, and its home is there. Under its wings are the forever remembered section.
Do you have one more question? You mentioned your ABCs. If I'm correct, the B is belief.
Belief in myself and in a power greater than myself.
Last question. When you look at your life, you look at the story, and you look at what happened, you look at what occurred on that day, and the reason why, do you find peace in knowing that it was out of your control? Do you find that it was in God's plan? Do you, and all that you've done in the past 30 years and continue to do, when have ever happened? Where do you find that when you look at the entirety the past 30 years and how your life shifted?
Um, you know, having gone through the struggles in my childhood and knowing I could overcome them helped me to believe in myself. But there's always been that power greater than myself that gives me comfort in it, if it's God's will to follow through with it. Um, but the first day we opened the door to let the children come in to fly their own mission, that that was the most joyous day because it didn't end. It didn't end in pain and suffering and a terrible tragedy. It ended in a continuation. So their mission continues. Every day, a yellow school bus drives up and children hop out and run into their Challenger Center, all eager to fly their mission. They're all prepared. They know they're going to be the technician, they're going to be the navigator, they're going to be the scientist, uh, the physician. They know their jobs and they're eager to go. And to see them work together as a team, solving problems. It's kind of like watching Apollo 13. They're solving these problems, mission control, helping out the kids on the space station. It's tremendously rewarding. And every anniversary, if at all possible, I want to go to a Challenger Center to see the children in their own mission. And that's the most rewarding of all.
Your plans this anniversary, the 30th? Is that where you'll be? Or?
The 30th, we will be at Kennedy Space Center with the Astronaut Memorial Foundation. My family will be there with me. But the night before, I will have been at the Challenger Center in Chattanooga. And speaking of overcoming and getting better, feeling better about life and yourself, several years after the accident, I met in Washington, D.C., at Arlington National Cemetery, the nicest man in the world, a general whose wife had died. And we had such compassion for each other that General Rogers was concerned about me and how I was overcoming my grief, and I was concerned about him, having never met each other, but we met at a cemetery on Easter at a sunrise service and became fast friends. And he's the best dad and granddad these kids have seen grow up since they lost their own.
That's that man there.
That's General Don Rogers.
Right. Thank you so much for your time.
Yes, Tarek, thank you.
Pouring out your art to us.